I'm Charles Shapiro, President of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. Welcome to today's program on extremism, QAnon, and the Proud Boys with Dr. Mia Bloom. This program is brought to you today by the members of the World Affairs Council. If you're not a member, please join the council. We've got 3 board members who are on the program today in the audience: Dennis Lockhart, former CEO of the Atlanta Fed; Sam Olens, a partner at Denton's LLP; and Rohit Verma, the CEO of Crawford and Company. Also, the Consul General of Israel in the Southeastern United States, Anat Sultan Dadon, is in the audience. And I want to give a shout out to Sarah Subramaniam, who used to be the youngest member of the World Affairs Council back when she was in high school. I think she was a junior when she joined the World Affairs Council. She's now a graduate of Georgetown University and working for CNN in Washington. So Tara, congratulations. Glad to have you in the audience. Everybody else, if you want your children to be successful, get them a membership in the World Affairs Council. If you have a question for Dr. Bloom, please submit it using the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So at the bottom of the screen, you'll see something that says more. Click on more, and there'll be a drop down, and one of them says Q&A. Use that. Please keep your questions short and direct. That makes it easier for me, so I don't have to edit them while I'm reading them. And now, Dr. Mia Bloom is professor of communications and Middle East studies at Georgia State University, Atlanta's greatest university. She's also taught at Penn State, Princeton, Cornell, Harvard, and McGill.
No, I have to do a correction. I had research positions. I wasn't teaching at Princeton. So some were research, and I got my degree at some of them. So. Sorry.
Okay, cool. Okay, and would you agree that McGill is Canada's finest university?
It's McGill and University of Toronto are sort of like the Harvard and Yale of Canada. But to quote Lisa Simpson, if when she was saying that. The Harvard of Canada, if you're the something of something, you're the nothing of nothing. So
okay, fine. Dr. Bloom is regularly featured as an expert contributor on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News on terrorism and national security issues. Her book about QAnon, Pastels and Pedophiles, which she wrote together with Sofia Moskalenko, will be available from Stanford Press in June. We will send everybody who is registered for the program the link to pre-order the book. Dr. Bloom is a native of Montreal, did her undergraduate work at McGill, got her master's at Georgetown and her PhD at Columbia University. She spoke to the council almost exactly a year ago, in April 2020. Welcome back, Mia. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Charles, thank you for having me again. And yeah, that talk that I prepared for you, I then turned into a series of articles. So thank you. You inspired the idea, because I wasn't originally working on how COVID-19 impacted terrorism. So I'm in your debt.
Oh, well, that's great. I did not know that. I hope you dedicated all your lectures to me.
Well, actually, one of them was entered into the congressional record by Jamie Raskin from Maryland, the impeachment.
Yes.
So yeah. You inspired some really great ideas.
That's cool. Okay, so let's start out at the beginning. What are Proud Boys and QAnon?
So it sounds like they're similar groups, but they're actually quite different. The Proud Boys is one of these groups that it's anti-government. And so depending if you're looking at the Proud Boys, there's one presence of the Proud Boys on Facebook. But then there's another presence of the Proud Boys on other social media platforms. And so some people might say it's kind of racist, but then you're going to say, well, Mr. Terrio, who's in charge of the Proud Boys, is not a Caucasian person. So it's kind of this amorphous anti-government, and it's sort of the right-wing equivalent in some ways of Antifa. Now, what was interesting about the Proud Boys is when we first started seeing a lot of protests happening and violence happening in some of the American cities, you would see people with either the OK sign or they invert it, and they invert it so it looks like a P. And one of the things that the Proud Boys were doing is that they were wearing all black and they were wearing, masks because of COVID. And so you could, from a distance, think that that violence was being perpetrated by Antifa. And I think that that's where some of the confusion has emerged, that they dressed up all in black and they're engaged in violence, and they've got a mask. And so they've infiltrated in many ways some of these protest movements because they're doing bad acts, but people might think that these acts were perpetrated by Antifa.
Okay, and what's QAnon?
So QAnon's completely different. QAnon is this baseless conspiracy that started on these message boards called the Chans. So you've had a 2chan, a 4chan, and 8chan. And the Chans it's sort of like, imagine like a big discussion group. And starting in 2017, someone named Q Patriot started leaving these little messages. And the messages were basically saying that there is a cabal of blood-drinking Democrats and elites who are exploiting children for their blood, or they're engaged in pedophilia. And so the only person who could save the children was Donald John Trump. And what's happened is this fringe conspiracy has gotten so large, and with millions now of people who either fully believe it or partially believe it. And it started to accumulate or merge into it all the other kinds of conspiracy theories that are out there in the world. And so, you have people who are QAnon, mostly from the right, but you also have 6% of people in QAnon consider themselves Democrats. So it's really this big ball, big sticky ball.
Okay, now just let me make this very clear. It is not illegal to be a member of either organization or to follow them on Facebook or
not in the US. In Canada has just made the Proud Boys illegal, and it's putting it in a category. But remember, Canada doesn't have the same kind of First Amendment rights that the United States has.
Yeah. Okay. So now, and 48% of American voters voted for Donald Trump. You can vote for Trump. You can be a Trump supporter. And this is not trying to, without being a QAnon supporter, obviously.
And that's one of the reasons that I mentioned, although it's disproportionately Republican because of the role of Donald Trump, you also have people who are former Bernie bros. You have people who came in who are vegans. I don't think there's a lot of vegan Trump voters. So that I think that it's important to understand that the political ideology is a little bit embracing, but when you look at what these QAnon candidates put, when they're voting, then that's where you really see the Republican nature, as well as their presence starting in October 2018 at Trump rallies. And, I'll be honest with you, I think when they first showed up, the Trump people were like, who are these people? But, as I did more and more research, and Sophia and I looked into QAnon, we found out that there were members of the Trump administration who were in touch with QAnon. So that some of these things, they weren't coincidences. QAnon would say, we need a proof from the president that he say tip top. And, a few days later, the president a former president appears on the balcony with Melania and the Easter Bunny. And he goes, I call him tippy top. And the QAnon people went wild. So it's important to understand that it's not one political party, but it is sort of like disproportionately one.
Okay, so now your academic work is, at least, as far as I know, thus far has been on ISIS and extremist, terrorist, jihadist groups. How similar are QAnon and Proud Boys? Do you use the same analytical skills to analyze these organizations as you use to analyze ISIS?
So the book didn't analyze the Proud Boys. So I just wanted to make that clear. The book is just on QAnon.
Okay.
And the reason, so what opens the door? In the summer of 2019, I think it might have been July, FBI Director Christopher Wray said that these conspiracy theories had the possibility of becoming terrorist, events. And it was in part because early on in sort of the, because it starts in 2017, but we start to see it gaining traction in 2018 to 2020, there were 12 different criminal acts that were perpetrated, one of which involved the Hoover Dam. And I think that was why Christopher Wray said if you blow up the Hoover Dam, that's a terrorist attack because you're attacking infrastructure. So that's why I think he said had the possibility. By the time we get the following summer, June 2020, he reiterated that in much more enthusiastic. And it's also when social media started pulling down the accounts and banning QAnon from their platforms.
So what attracts people to extremist organizations? Is it a certain type of personality? Are they people having financial problems, personal issues? I mean, what makes people believe that there's a conspiracy of blood drinking pedophiles, which when you say it, I mean, sounds silly just on the very face of it.
I mean, it sounds silly, but 37% of Republicans who were polled by American Enterprises Institute said, well, we're not sure it's entirely wrong. And 17% said, yeah, we actually agree with it. So it's surprisingly popular. So there's a few things, and some of these things are what we touched upon last year when I mentioned what COVID-19 did as the perfect storm in order to increase the appeal of groups like ISIS. And it's that, you said, are people having money problems? I think during the pandemic, almost everyone had some sort of financial, it was a disconnect, it was a disruption. But also the reasons that people gravitate towards conspiracy theories, and this is all the theories on the left and the right, is that the conspiracy theory offers some sort of comforting answer that these things can't just happen randomly. Good people don't just get killed randomly, that there's something behind the scenes that is, like the puppet master pulling the strings. The other thing happened to be that because people were at home more, and certainly during quarantine, you see a massive uptick in QAnon activity. And it's one of the images that I supplied to you to show like QAnon activity was relatively flat. And then you have the pandemic and it goes up, according to the Wall Street Journal, 600% increase.
And by activity, you mean online activity?
Online activity, posting, groups, different things. Oh. And then what happened is that people were home more. We know that social media, like extended periods of time on social media is not good. But then also was the emergence of this fake documentary called Plandemic, that the pandemic had been planned. And now, although YouTube was able to take it down after 4 days, over 8 million people had already viewed it.
Wow.
And then it started disseminating through Facebook groups and chats and all the other platforms. And that then became part of the QAnon mythology. So the pandemic has, as I said last year to you, put extremism on steroids. It definitely put QAnon on steroids.
I mean, so if you're not a member of if you don't believe in wild conspiracies, okay, and I know that's value laden right there. It's easy to dismiss people who believe in conspiracies, whether they are of the right or they're left or they're you name it, as being mentally unstable. Is that right? Wrong? Is that dismissive when it shouldn't be of the people who believe in this?
Well, okay, so let's take that question and break it down into a few parts.
Thanks.
The first thing is that almost everybody believes in one conspiracy theory. And I'll give you an example. A bunch of my students believe that there was a second shooter at the Kennedy assassination, or that it wasn't an accident that Lady Di died in France in a tunnel. That maybe the fact that she was dating Dodi Fayed was embarrassing to the royal family. They didn't want an Arab, I guess, stepfather raising the future king. So everyone believes in a conspiracy theory. And we usually tend to see in elections in the United States that the party that did not get elected as a result of having lost the election will usually engage in some sort of conspiratorial thinking. So, for example, people will say, when Stacey Abrams lost, well, we have all these explanations, and in Fulton County, there were voting machines that didn't have the plug, or there were voters that were kicked off the roster, or when, for example, Reverend Ossoff and sorry, it's not Reverend, it's Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff won. Then there was Dominion voting machines scammed us. So you always have that. The mental illness thing is a little bit of a different sort of side discussion. And the reason for that is the pandemic has also increased mental illness. And we've gone from 1 in 10 to 4 in 10 people who are having extreme anxiety as a result of the quarantines and as a result of a global pandemic. And so we do notice, and Sophia published this, I think 3 weeks ago, and her article for The Conversation, which is usually like, you know, this little academic-y thing, went viral. It has been republished in 7 languages and in 100 different newspapers and magazines, including the Daily Beast. And, you know, she said to me, I didn't get a penny for this. So, but she did notice that QAnon people who have been arrested, either at the Capitol or in that period I was mentioning from 2018 to 2020, do have higher levels of mental illness, as well as, you know, you have recently a story of a woman who killed her own kids. So you have women in 2 instances now that might have either had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is you are injuring your child in order to get sympathy, or killed their own children, or kidnapped their own children because they had lost custody. So there's a lot of different kinds of mental illness that we can associate with QAnon, but not all of the violence that we observed was terrorism until January 6th.
Oof. I mean, there's a lot there. So, you know, if one has a friend or a relative who belongs to QAnon, what do we do? You know, I mean, I guess there's degrees of QAnon-ness, right? Yeah. I mean, what is it that you should do? I mean, we've all got the crazy uncle who, you know, when you get together at family gatherings says kind of goofy stuff, but he's not really crazy. He's just your uncle, right? I mean, what should we do about this?
I think that sort of has exacerbated the QAnon phenomenon because you hear a lot of people. There is on one of the subreddits, which is again another one of these online message boards, where people, it's like, you know, Al-Anon, it's people who have lost family members to QAnon talking amongst themselves, like, how do we deal with this? Very often what has happened is, imagine you're at, you know, for this coming year, Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving, and you got someone who's like, you know, I'm telling you, they're drinking the blood. I'm telling you, Tom Hanks, he's drinking, and you're going to be like, let's not invite him next year. And I think what's happened is a lot of people, when a member of the family or their friend network is spouting the QAnon mythology, they're going to kind of be like, I'm going to unfollow you on Facebook and I'm going to delete your number. We should not isolate them. And I want to make it clear, what I've said is I want to separate the wheat from the chaff. The people who are running the show, the QAnon influencers, the people who are profiting financially, I don't have empathy for them. In fact, it's kind of a Ponzi scheme. They can go to jail. But the vast majority of people who believe in QAnon, we have to approach them with kindness and empathy. And so this is where, instead of shunning the crazy uncle, you embrace the crazy uncle. And then what Sophia did is sort of like a step-by-step, depending on, like you said, that level of QAnonness, what kinds of questions to ask. Don't say you're crazy and this is ridiculous, because everyone's just gonna, with confirmation bias, double and triple down. But what you wanna do is you want to engage them and just very slowly plant the seeds of doubt, because they didn't go into QAnon like that, and we're not gonna be able to get them out of QAnon instantly. The other thing that Sophia did, and she is a clinical psychologist and one of the world's leading experts on the psychology of terrorism and radicalization, she broke the QAnon group into 3 categories. You have the people who are who've left. How do we treat them? What kinds of interventions are good for them? And then you have the people who are starting to have doubts. How do you nurture those doubts and help them get back into the light But then she also said there's going to be a group of diehards that no matter what happens or what is said, they're not leaving. And we also have to mitigate our expectations of how successful any psychological or psychosocial intervention can be.
I mean, but that's asking all of us to do things that is not normal.
Takes a village.
I mean,
Sorry if I'm quoting Clinton.
It's easier to just stay away from your relative than it is to actually deal with this and deal with it head on and deal with it on what you're saying is on a regular basis.
Well, if you look at it this way, I'm friends with Christian Picciolini, who is well known on MSNBC. He's a former neo-Nazi, and sort of his like little tagline when he's trying to be very succinct, he's like, hug a Nazi. In other words, if we approach people negatively, there's going to be a negative result. If we approach people positively, we increase our chances of success. But it does put a little bit of the onus of responsibility on those of us who are not in QAnon to help the people who are. And, I'm not saying that this should become a second job, but one of the things we need to do is, if there's a whole generation of children who are being raised by women who believe in QAnon, we're going to need to give resources to the teachers. Like, how are you going to teach the children once they get to the school that this is all completely false? Because when you're in a conspiracy and someone's trying to convince you that there isn't one, they just think you're part of the conspiracy. So it's very hard to argue with the conspiracy theorists. What we did in the book, though, is we started to pull at the thread, as you call it. For example, and this was my favorite example, and this is the one I want to share with the council. I'm having to read the QAnon stuff in order to understand the psychology and what they're talking about. And there's a UK QAnon influencer named Martin Geddes, and he writes the saying, "Where we go one, we go all." If people remember, July 4th of last year, former Lieutenant General Michael Flynn made an oath of allegiance to QAnon. So it was the regular American oath of allegiance. And then he added, "Where we go one, we go all." And so Mr. Geddes in the UK says, that saying is the inscription on the bell on John F. Kennedy's boat. And so now I can look for something, right? Because that's a tangible. Right. That's not like, I can't convince you I don't drink blood because, because I haven't aged. And so, of course, I must be drinking the blood to stay young. But I can find a bell. So I picked up the phone and I called my friend, Joe Brown, who's a professor at UMass Boston, because they have the Kennedy Library there. The boat is there. It's called the Victoria. And he also spoke to the archivist and they said, no, there's no bell. And we're like, okay. And then I got in touch with Douglas Brinkley, who is the presidential historian. And he was kind enough, as a favor to me, he called the Kennedy family. There was a second boat, the Honey Fitz.
Right.
Is there a bell? No bell. Was there a bell that was stolen? Do we need Nicolas Cage to find the bell? Yeah. No bell. And so there was an image that that Geddes was using on social media and in his work. And so I did a reverse image search and found out it was a screenshot from a 1996 movie with Jeff Bridges called White Squall. And like all the sailors are going, where we go one, we go all. And there is a bell in cursive writing. It's from a film. And that sort of gave me an idea. How much of QAnon is actually coming from plot lines in either literature or in Hollywood movies? And we found a lot. So it was so funny. For a group that calls Hollywood Pedowood, we got something like 15 different myths came from literature and movies. And none of them are coming from like well-known movies. Like if I copied something from Back to the Future, you would recognize it. Right. Most of the movies had like really low tomato meter ratings. So it was like maybe not a lot of people saw the movie. But the other reason to take something from literature or a movie, and this is Sophia explaining how the brain works. Our brains sometimes process and imprint information and we can't remember, did that really happen or did I see that in a film? And so you also sometimes have that like, did I say that or did I just think that? Because that's how memory works.
Sure.
So if let's say they're saying something, you're like, oh, wait a second, that sounds familiar, but you don't realize it sounds familiar because you saw it in a film and you didn't read it in the newspaper.
Okay, we're getting tons of questions in from the audience. So let me go to them, and gosh, I've got more questions for you as well that I'm not going to get to, but
and Charles, Honey Fitz, I laughed. I was like, that has got to be the most, goyish name I've ever heard for a boat.
Oh, come on. It was the presidential yacht.
Okay.
The yacht in Hyannisport was the Honey Fitz. Okay, cool. Oh man, these are great questions.
And I'll try to be succinct and less chatty.
Okay, and they are tendentious. So yeah, from no surprise there. So this is from Becky Carter. At what point do believers in religion become considered believers in a conspiracy theory? For example, the belief in rapture might be considered a conspiracy.
I mean, first of all, that's a really interesting and good question. So let me just get that out of the way. There is an intersection of QAnon and religion, but the fact that the rapture, I mean, so anything sort of magical, Moses splitting the Red Sea, I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory. When it's part of a religious belief, it's part of a canon that, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people believe in, but it's based on spirituality. I don't think that the rapture is a conspiracy theory, but I don't necessarily think that everyone who's a Christian may believe in the rapture. I think the rapture is a very narrow part of Christianity. It's not all Christians. But no, it's a really good, the part that I was thinking you were asking is like, is QAnon a religion rather than is the rapture a conspiracy?
Yeah.
And so that's where you have to suspend disbelief to believe in a lot of the QAnon. And a lot of the QAnon requires, like that there's a plan. Well, that sounds a little bit like, Allahu Ya'lam, like God will take care of things that they say in Arabic. And so you also have to believe that you see the light. And so it's one of the reasons the evangelicals have been drawn so heavily to QAnon. But what's interesting is that so much of QAnon has embedded within it these anti-Semitic sort of tropes, these things about drinking blood and about they cite the protocols of the elders of Zion. And so a lot of evangelicals are actually quite pro-Israel. And so there's almost kind of a disconnect. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting is as QAnon has spread, if you think about it, the evangelicals are also a proselytizing faith. And so if many evangelicals believe in QAnon, when they go out on their mission to convert people to their faith, they might be bringing the conversion to QAnon as well.
Okay, wow. Jim Reed asks, is the head of 8chan cute?
Right, okay, so 8chan doesn't exist anymore. Cloudflare, which is the hosting services, you guys might have heard, do you remember in January when Amazon said to Parler, well, it's actually called Parlay, they weren't hosting it anymore. Same thing happened to 8chan with Cloudflare, where they kicked them off, in part because 8chan had become the platform to live stream mass casualty attacks, like the Christchurch killings, or attacks at the Kmart. There was a killing, like a mass casualty shooting at Kmart. I think it was in Texas. So 8chan was kind of like the underbelly.
It was El Paso. Yeah.
It did El Paso. So it was Texas. Yeah. Okay. So what happens is Cloudflare gets rid of 8chan, and 8chan is down for like 3 months. And when it reemerges, it's called 8kun, K-U-N, and the Kuns are connected to Russia. And so at this point in the story, a lot of the platforms that QAnon is using are Russian platforms. And so not surprisingly, Russia now has a QAnon problem. They have a growing QAnon community as well. What happens, let's go back to the good question. So the previous owner, so this is the Watkins issue, and there's 2 different documentaries. If people are really interested in QAnon and you can't wait for the book, there's 2 documentaries I wanted to recommend. One on Vice News, 3 parts, and one on HBO, Q Into the Storm, 3 parts. The Vice News one doesn't come to a conclusion. It suggests a variety of different people who might have been posting as Q. And actually, the conclusion that I came down to, and I'm stealing it from Clint Watts, so it's Clint Watts's idea and quote, that QAnon was sort of like Princess Bride. Do you remember the Dread Pirate Roberts? You know, and
Right.
there was no one pirate. It was passed down from person to person until Wesley got it. And it was just the name that inspired, you know, fear. What happens is that the HBO documentary says that it's the son of the owner of 8kun. So it's Ron Watkins, not Jim Watkins. And so what we basically said is, we looked at all the different people that it could be Q. And then we said, but you know, at this point, most people who believe in QAnon don't care who it is. And because it's gotten bigger than just the one person. It's become almost in many ways a social movement.
Oh, man. Okay. And just, it occurred to me that it might be some people who are not familiar with the term Q. I mean, Q is supposedly the leader of.
He's supposedly the person, you know, he's Q Patriot. And oh, let me just explain, because people might be going, why the letter Q? Q clearance is an actual security clearance for the Department of Energy. And like if you were working in nuclear, like at a plant, you would need a Q clearance to be working with certain kinds of energy. But it has nothing to do with like spying, has nothing to do with the State Department clearance or intelligence clearances. So that's why I was giving this talk originally, before I started writing the book. And someone said, well, I have a Q clearance. Am I in Q? I said, no, you're just a really smart scientist that has been working on nuclear weapons.
Wow. Okay. Shirley Smith has asked a bunch of questions, and I'm going to apologize to Shirley because I'm not going to ask them all. But she asks, why doesn't the FBI, the federal government, consider QAnon and Proud Boys to be terrorist organizations, especially after January 6th?
That's a fantastic question. The first question, which was kind of one of the answers I gave last year, we don't have a clear domestic terrorism statute. And so most terrorist groups, when you look in the books, they're a foreign terrorist group, or it's a group that exists in the US, but also exists somewhere else. So like someone in the US that belongs to ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Boko Haram or one of them. Proud Boys are much more violent, and it's more of a violent anti-government, you know, bordering like some of the militias. As you can imagine, with the previous administration, there was some hesitancy to color all of these anti-government groups as terrorists. And it is one of the things that I think we are going to have to address very soon about what constitutes terrorism. Because the example I'll give you, a year ago when I talked to you, and I said that's from 2008 until present time, so last year, 76% of terrorist attacks in the US had been perpetrated by domestic extremists, and only 24% by jihadis. Right. And I gave that statistic, which is from the New America, to the FBI when I was lecturing, and they came up to me and they're like, where are you getting that number? And I explained, and they said, well, a lot of the ones you're calling domestic terrorism, we call those bias crimes. And the reason for that has to do with how do you prosecute these crimes? The barrier for a federal prosecution is much higher. So sometimes, even if we know it's kind of domestic terrorism, it might be tried as a lesser charge because it's going to be charged not at the federal level, but at the state level. And the requirements for evidence and to persuade the jury are different. Of course, the sentencing is higher for terrorism. So that's why you sometimes get people completely outraged, like trying to convince you that someone who kills 3 people over a parking spot in North Carolina, clearly that was domestic terrorism, but it was charged as a bias crime. And I think that was about 4 years ago.
Yeah. Oof, man, that's difficult. Okay, so good question here from Stevie Kiesel. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Have Nazis and militia groups and other far-right extremist groups exploited the rise of QAnon? What's the connection between other right-wing extremist groups and QAnon?
Also a fantastic question. We were looking for that, so I'm on these encrypted chats and all these QAnon groups. And you could see, especially.
I mean, they just let you in, so anybody can join, or do you have to have a? How do you get?
I have a code name that I can't tell you, but yes, I don't go as me. I have a code name, but yeah, they're not as good about security as ISIS was. ISIS was a little bit more tough. Elizabeth Newman was very concerned that after January 20th, that the neo-Nazis were going to pull from the, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of QAnon believers. And it really hasn't happened. And you'll hear people who were in QAnon, like Linka Perron. She is someone who has defected or left QAnon, and she does a lot of interviews. And she'll say, well, I never actually saw anything anti-Semitic. So it's not like there's an automatic, transference. And it was one of the things I saw last summer, where these groups, the Boogaloo group that we talked about, the group with the whole shirts, at some point thought they were going to be able to recruit the involuntary celibates. We call them incels. And so they created a series of memes, like pictures, cartoonish pictures, to appeal. But then, the other Boogaloo guys were like, no, this guy doesn't look like he has enough muscle to pick up a gun. So these are not groups that are naturally and easily allied. However, I do want to say that we do have some people that there might be a little bit of overlap, so that they are neo-Nazis and they believe in Q, or they're KKK and they believe in Q. So it's possible to have a hybridization, but it's not necessarily the case that all the right-wing extremists and these dangerous militias are going to start recruiting QAnon. And that's where we kind of took an issue with, we don't think QAnon is a terrorist movement. Sophia doesn't, and Sophia wrote the books on radicalization. She doesn't think it's a radicalization. She thinks, actually, going back to your excellent question, that it's an issue of mental illness. Like the mental illness, that's how we're going to solve it, not with de-radicalization.
Okay, I've got some great questions, and Jack Harden, who's a good friend, asked the following. And
I've met Jack. Hi, Jack.
Where is this going? Will the prosecutions of the people arrested on January 6th dampen this, or is it actually advertising for QAnon and Proud Boys? I mean, do they see that as a defeat or as a victory?
Jack, what's so funny about it is many of the QAnon people, and among some of their luminaries, a local, Lynn Wood, and Sidney Powell, who's former General Flynn's lawyer, and who was, the one talking about the Kraken, in court when Ms. Powell was being sued by the company that owns the voting machines. She was like, oh yeah, none of this was real.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay. There is going to be a QAnon conference in Texas next month. So they're still bringing in all these people for a conference. And Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood are speakers at the conference. So wow. I don't think it's going away. One of the things that you have with QAnon is this, like Marc-Andre Argentino calls it hopium, as if like hope was a drug, that they have this idea that, well, you know what, this is 5-level chess and we'll figure it out and it's all part of the plan, trust the plan. And so whenever a date comes and goes and they go, well, they said do your own research, maybe we got the date wrong. So they tend not to look at the failed prophecies as evidence that QAnon is wrong. And I think that's one of the reasons the documentaries went to such great lengths and expense, and it took years to make the HBO version, to unmask who is Q, so that maybe people will be like, so it's some kid in his parents' basement kind of thing. I remember, what is it? President Trump said a 300-pound kid in the parents' basement was in charge of, the leaked emails. We have to realize that the way confirmation bias works, it's very hard to convince someone who's a true believer that their beliefs are wrong. And so this is part of part of the challenge, and it's the reason why Sophia took it like as a step by step by step. Depending on what kind of QAnon person you have, you're going to have a different kind of intervention.
Well, there's some religious cult that believes the world is going to end on a particular date, and then when the world doesn't end on that date, they just say, "Oh well, we miscalculated the date," and they
like Heaven's Gate. I mean, that's what happened with Heaven's Gate.
Yeah,
that was a cult.
Yeah, you pick another date. QAnon predicted that Trump was going to win, that President Trump would be reelected. Have people lost faith? Is that how does that work?
Well, some people did lose faith. I was on one of these rooms, undercover, watching the QAnon in like real time, and the former president was walking up the steps to Air Force One, and they're like, "Wait for it, wait for it. He's gonna turn around. He's gonna declare martial law. Wait for it." And when he went in, and they were just like, "What?" And so people were very concerned that you were gonna have hundreds, if not thousands, of people hurt themselves because they genuinely thought that we would have like the movie The Purge if Joe Biden became president. But then they had like an explanation. If you may recall, in his first week of office, President Joe Biden signed a series of executive orders. He signed 17 of them. And so QAnon went, Q is the 17th letter in the alphabet. Maybe Biden is the bad guy and he's working with Trump. And we said Trump would be reelected, but maybe in 2024. And another stream of argument for QAnon is that's not Biden. That's really Trump wearing a Biden face, like face off. So you have some pretty extraordinary explanations, but it doesn't really shake the tree enough to get them out of the conspiracy.
Wow. Okay, I've got one last question, and then we're going to go, because I told you 45 minutes. You've got a class coming up I know you want to prepare for. When, I can't even remember the date now, but 3 weeks ago.
March 4th date.
Thank you. When this guy kills 8 people in Georgia.
Oh, that's
that wasn't March 4th. That was later.
I thought you were talking about QAnon.
Okay, including 6 Asian women. As soon as it happened, I mean, literally, you posted on Twitter an article from the Toronto newspaper of a similar event that had happened in 2018 and said that was an incel who, I think it was 8 people who were killed in Toronto, no? Or 10 people were killed.
I think it was 2 or 3.
Okay.
And you don't know his name because he was 17. He's a minor.
Okay. So how did you make that connection? And I invited you to talk about QAnon and Proud Boys, and now I'm going to ask you about the incels. I mean, is what's going on? How'd you make that connection? And is this, I hate women so much, I'm going to kill women. Is that the deal?
And this is the reason that I came up with that similarity is that we've had an incel attack in the US at a yoga studio. There was the attack in a massage parlor in Toronto. And because the first thing I saw was, I actually was doing a peer-to-peer work. I worked very closely with the McCain Institute. I actually knew Senator McCain before he sadly passed away. And I was doing this like mentoring thing with their students. And so I came to it a little bit late. By the time I heard about it, we knew that they were massage parlors, and killing women at a massage parlor just seemed similar. But what I also said was, sometimes people have more than one motive. And so I didn't want us to land on one thing. Like it wasn't just, misogyny weaponized. It might have also been a bias crime because he doesn't like Asians. Like you have to understand that these motivations can be layered, like a cake. It's not just one thing that ever motivates these terrible acts of violence. But yeah, and also just to be honest with the people, because you've been kind enough to sit through this talk, I sometimes have a gut instinct and I go with it. And I think what it is 33 or 34 years of studying terrorism and violence. it's like you heard people say, I have a nose for news. I have a nose for what kind of terrorist attack it is. So sometimes my insights are following my gut instinct, and that was my gut instinct.
Wow. Okay, we've got more questions. I'm going to email them to you.
Okay.
And so that I can let you go from Nicholas Brown.
Well, I can do 5 more minutes if you want to. I see.
No, let's
No, it's because I know John Mulholland. I haven't seen him in years.
Okay. So, okay, I'm going to skip down to John Mulholland. That just came in. It says, she's impressed but not surprised. Thank you from John Mulholland. Nicholas Brown asked this, and this is complicated. What are your thoughts on the newly released Project Veritas? CNN directors who were filmed undercover admitting to pushing fake news about President Trump and COVID, et cetera, to drive up ratings. Do you think that could have contributed to the growth of groups like Q and right-wing extremism?
Project Veritas, we know, is a conspiracy organization. So I take very cautiously anything with Project Veritas, especially because, they have this sort of gotcha approach to, I'm filming you, and then they cut and they edit it in such a way. We saw this with the Project Veritas Planned Parenthood scandal a few years ago. So If you are looking at Project Veritas and they kind of have a very bad track record, I would say that, it's unlikely. And here's how you know about conspiracy theories: when they are actual, like the Tuskegee experiments, and when they are fictional. Benjamin Franklin used to say you could have a conspiracy with 3 people if 2 of the 3 are dead. When there is a conspiracy, it is impossible to keep it quiet. That's how we found out about Tuskegee. So the idea that CNN is doing something, you would have some defector from CNN, come forward. And like many of the women have come forward, with Andrew Cuomo and all these other scandals, like at some point, the web is loosened. So just what I would say is diversify your news sources, and you'll probably then be able to judge for yourself which parts are true and which parts might be hyperbole.
Okay, Dr. Mia Bloom, this has been great, a fascinating now 50 minutes. I want to thank you so much for devoting your time to us. To everybody in the audience, where we will put the recording of this on YouTube this afternoon. And
apologies for the interruption.
Nothing you can do about that. But thank you so much. This has been interesting, dealing with a topic that is super complicated and with lots of pitfalls and traps out there in it. We've got an upcoming program on April 20th, Goldman Sachs and 1 Million Black Women initiative with Asahi Pompey, who is the global head of corporate engagement and president of Goldman Sachs Foundation. This is April 20th. Cecily McLeod, one of our council members and one of the smartest people you'll ever meet, is going to moderate the program. So mark your calendars. I think it's already, you can register now. It's already on our website. Please register for the program. 3 requests for audience members: join the World Affairs Council, either as an individual member, or better yet, get your company to join and become a corporate member. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. While the verb is subscribe, it doesn't cost any money. It is free, but that means that you can see not just this recording with Mia Bloom, but you can see all of our previous programs, and it's easy then to send it to your friends. And then that's the next thing I want to do. I want to invite you to invite your friends to join our programs, either as an audience member or send recordings, our YouTubes to your friends so that they can see it as well. I want to thank Valerin Lopez DeFrank, our producer, and Fernando Luquini Shihada, the council's executive director. And I have to give a special shout out to Laura Brower, our assistant producer, who is getting married this weekend. So congratulations to Laura. Mia, thank you so much. This has just been great. I hope you have a great class this afternoon. Thank you. I hope you will. I look forward to your book. We'll share information on how to buy your book with everybody in the audience. And thank you so much. This has just been
Thank
great.
you so much. And the book will break it down so that it's a little bit easy to follow, because I guarantee you, you are right. It's complicated. So thank you so much for spending your hour with me today.
Thanks, Mia. Bye-bye. Everybody have a great afternoon.